there are two categories of organisms and how organisms are able to obtain their energy. One are autotrophs and the other one are heterotrophs. Plants are an example of autotrophs, in other words, organisms that are able to make their own food. We are an example of heterotrophs, organisms that must consume other organisms in order to obtain our energy. Now, the reason why we must be able to do this is because we need to maintain all the chemical reactions in our cell. We need to be able to maintain our metabolism. So we will perform cellular respiration, where we take organic molecules, we break them down in order to release energy, and we use mitochondria in order to do that. What's really cool about plants is that they do both. Plants will do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So plants use their chloroplast in order to capture that sun energy, and they use it in order to make sugar. So photosynthesis makes sugar, whereas cellular respiration in plants will take that sugar and it will break it down using that mitochondria. The energy molecule that we've been talking about is ATP. So ATP is another way of expressing how much energy is in a molecule. So there are 3 phosphate groups attached to ATP. There are 2 phosphate groups attached to ADP. So that whenever we break a phosphate group in ATP, it will form ADP. When that bond is broken, energy is also released in the process. An overview of cellular respiration. So, those organisms that perform cellular respiration will take in that sugar. So that's from the outside environment. We will breathe in oxygen. And when we do that, we will produce carbon dioxide, we will produce water, and we will also produce ATP. So what's really cool about this particular equation is that if you were to flip it, you would have photosynthesis. So, in other words, we were to make that arrow go in the opposite direction. We have sunlight, we have water, and we have carbon dioxide that will make our sugar and our oxygen. So, cellular respiration and photosynthesis are opposites of one another. Now, kind of an overview of cellular respiration and what you're going to be responsible for. So, cellular respiration takes place in 2 main parts, glycolysis and aerobic respiration. And further, with aerobic respiration, we have the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. Glycolysis literally means sugar splitting. The glyco means sugar, the lysis means splitting. So it breaks down into products needed for aerobic respiration. Now, the Krebs cycle is that first part for aerobic respiration. So if oxygen is present, then it will move on to the Krebs cycle and form electron carriers. These electron carriers are NADH and FADH2. Also in this process for the Krebs cycle is the production of carbon dioxide. Now, the last step is going to be the electron transport chain. Its entire purpose is to make ATP, and it will make ATP through electron carriers. These electron carriers are going to be your NADH and FADH2 that were produced in previous cycles. Each time that an NADH is produced, it will produce 3 molecules of ATP. Anytime that FADH2 is produced, it will produce 2 molecules of ATP. And that occurs in the electron transport chain. So here's kind of an overview, a rundown of the results. So we have glycolysis that takes place in the cytoplasm, whereas the other 2 take place in the mitochondria. And so these are the products that I want you to make sure that you know. And you can see that if we were to go back to that equation associated with cellular respiration, we can see where each one of those particular processes either makes or it breaks down that particular product. Glycolysis will break down that sugar. The Krebs cycle will form that CO2, and that electron transport chain will make that energy. So all of the different parts of that equation must be accounted for. Now, for photosynthesis, so photosynthesis is a little bit more difficult, so we're going to try to condense it down and simplify it as much as possible. So photosynthesis does occur in two different phases, the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. And so, like I said before, with this equation is just simply the equation for cellular respiration reversed. So we have plants that take in carbon dioxide, they take in water, and with that sunlight will create sugar and will also create oxygen as a byproduct. So the light-dependent reaction takes place in the thylakoid of the chloroplast, and it uses that sunlight to make both ATP and an NADPH. NADPH is an electron carrier for specifically photosynthesis. That's easy to remember because that P does not exist in cellular respiration, so that P only exists with photosynthesis. Now, the light-independent reaction is used to make this 3-carbon molecule called G3P. G3P is an intermediate in making all different types of sugars. And this takes place, the light-independent reaction takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. So here's an example of the chloroplast. We have the light-independent reaction. It takes place in the stroma, whereas in the light-dependent reaction, it takes place in the thylakoid. So this is the thylakoid here. It is these flattened sacs that are located inside the chloroplast, and the stroma is the fluid that's filled inside the chloroplast. And so we can see that the Calvin cycle takes place in that stroma. The light-dependent reaction takes place within this thylakoid. Now, your chloroplast will absorb different wavelengths of light. So we can see here that all sorts of different wavelengths of light are being absorbed by this chloroplast except for what it reflects. Generally speaking, most plants are what color? Green. And so in this case, they will not absorb green. They will reflect green. So we can see that within the chloroplast pigments, where we have the highest absorption rates occurring towards the end of this spectrum, where we see a lot of absorption occurring at the color of blue. We also see some absorption that's occurring with the colors of red and orange. And then the last part of photosynthesis is that not all plants are going to have water that's readily available. So we have different types of plants that adopt different types of pathways. So we have a C4 plant like corn and sugarcane that have structural modifications that are able to perform photosynthesis in different types of hot and arid climates. Now, in cam plants perform photosynthesis at night. So these are going to be your cactus and your pineapple. And again, in order to make sure it reduces the amount of moisture lost, that's the reason why it performs photosynthesis at night. Not only that, but they also have some structural modifications as well. The cactus has a modified leaf, and in terms of spines, that's what we see, is that with that reduced surface area, it also reduces the amount of moisture that's lost. Alrighty guys, so that's cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Hopefully that made some sense. If it didn't, then please let me know and we can talk about it on Teams. Thanks guys very much.